welcome back to the Until Jesus Runs This Campus podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and today I get to be joined by one of my very close friends, JC. So today we are going to be starting kind of a podcast series that'll go for 3 or 4 weeks, talking about just different students here in our local community's testimonies. I kind of got this idea when we were at our night of worship a couple nights ago with our church, and I just felt like it would be so powerful as to the fact that I know I struggle with this a lot of feeling like when I heard other people's testimonies, mine wasn't good enough, and so I didn't have a testimony at all. And so I think that is kind of like the heart behind this whole series that will take part over the next few weeks. Is just getting to hear different people's testimonies and real college student testimonies. And I think my heart and hope behind it is that I want it to be used as kind of encouragement that everybody has a testimony, even though you may not go through something like super deep in your eyes, God is still using it. And even if you're in a super deep time where you are like, God can never use this, he's still using it. And so, yeah, I'm so excited. JC, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about who you are?
Sure. So I'm JC. I've been going to T-Rock since I got here. I mean, it took a little bit, but that was in 2020. And I'm a master's student right now, so I got my bachelor's
Smart
in
girl.
May. Yes, I wasn't ready to leave college life into the real world, but I've been a part of Lauren's life group. I was like a couple years ago, I was in it for a little bit, and then I had to go student teach because I was in education, and now I'm in it again. Yes, so it's been really great. Oh, I did get rebaptized.
Yes, that was so exciting.
On Valentine's Day, so that was good. That's like just another part of who I am. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited for you to get to, I know a little bit, but even for me to get to know more about you and for the people to get to know more about you. And hopefully it's used to encourage people. So I just kind of want to jump in. Obviously, I don't know your whole story, but where did you kind of get introduced to church? Where did that start becoming a part of your life?
So for me, church was always a part of our Sunday routine as a family. Immediately as I was a child, Sunday school was always a thing every Sunday. Eventually when I got old enough to be in the youth group, our youth met on Wednesdays. So I did that as well. And then I went to church camp. We always did like Easter retreat and stuff like that. So I always knew of Jesus and I was always in the church, but I never truly felt like I had my own relationship with the Lord until like further on. But I've always like known Jesus. I prayed with him, my family on dinner time. We'd pray at nighttime. Like we'd pray like super little. Our parents would come in and like pray with us. So talking to Jesus, I grew up around that. It just wasn't until I was on my own where I got to actually explore that.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people, and speaking for myself as well, come from. Like a lot of times people think that when you come from a churchy background or you come from the background where you were raised in church your whole entire life, I will say, and I'll die on this hill, that it is oftentimes harder for those people to find their own walk with Christ than it is for somebody who was introduced later in their life. Because when you are growing up so much around it, you become so numb to the fact of like who God is, like what he did for us, like because it's just ingrained in your head so much that at times can like not mean anything. And so that's so cool to know. I didn't know that you grew up in the church too. Okay, so kind of going into, I think where the meat of a lot of this will come from is, where was your kind of finding Jesus moment? How did you get there? All of that kind of stuff.
All that good stuff. So I was a transfer student here at Tarleton. I did my I stayed home my first year of college and finished out, because I did dual credit in high school, so I finished out those first credits I needed at home. And then I transferred here in 2020, which was during lovely COVID. Everything was shut down. So that plays a huge part into like where I ended up. But I lived in the dorms. I was in Integrity. I had 3 other roommates, and I just remember being stuck into this, like stuck in this apartment, stuck in my room, or stuck in the dorm, stuck in my room. And I felt myself start to spiral. And by spiral, I mean, like, I just felt myself isolate myself from people. Like, I didn't go to D Hall because I didn't want to go by myself.
Yeah.
So I lived off of peanut butter sandwiches, which is great, by the way, but definitely shouldn't be doing that. I hardly ever went to class. I mean, they were on Zoom. They were offered on Zoom, 9 times out of 10 on Zoom, and it wasn't because of a mask or anything like that. Like, I just, for some reason, I didn't feel confident in myself. I didn't feel confident in my self-worth. Like, I was afraid anywhere I went, people were going to judge me. And at that time, I had no idea where that stimulated. No idea. But I ended up, there was a crossing point for me. I was going grocery shopping by myself. That was the only thing I did by myself because I worked at HEB. So I was like, it's a familiar place. I was like, so that was the only thing I did by myself. And then I was grocery shopping for my peanut butter and my bread. And one of the things I brought with me was silverware, like like to wash into the dorm with our little small kitchenette thing. Like, we had it. But for some reason, in my mind, something was like, go ahead and just get like plastic silver. And I know this is going to seem so like, but I promise there's a point. I was like, just get plastic silver so you don't have to leave your room. Like, what's the point of going out and like possibly running into your roommates? Like, and they weren't even bad people. Like, it wasn't anything like that. It was just something was deeply rooted in me that I just wasn't accepted at all. And so I was like, okay, so I got my plastic silverware checked out. And I remember I was on the phone with my mom that evening, and she was like, so what'd you do today? And I told her I went grocery shopping. She asked what I got, and I told her, she was like, why'd you get silverware? Like, we literally purchased silverware that all it takes is wash. Like, are you lazy? And I was like, no. And I didn't know how to tell her like the thoughts that I was having. And I was like, I don't really know. And I think it took a little bit longer for me to like open up to her, but eventually there was just this one night where I was like, I feel so alone. And the one thing about isolation that I firmly believe in, it is the worst place. The enemy will attack you. Those thoughts that I was having was the enemy. And I didn't realize it then, but that's like a huge role of what my mom was able to like drag me out of, because I eventually broke down on the phone with her, and I was like, this is what's going on. These are my thoughts. And she was like, I think you need to go see a counselor. Like, these are not that they're not normal, but these are things you need to go talk to someone about. And my mom is like, her degree was in counseling. She was like, but I think you need like someone there, like that you can go to. And so the next morning, I wake up bright and early at 8 a.m. and I call the counseling people at Tarleton, and I was like, hey, I think I need an appointment. And they asked all these like serious questions, and it's terrifying. It's intimidating, and you have to be so real with them, and you just have to be able to be like, this is what I'm experiencing, and I don't know how to deal with it. And it's letting go of that control, and it's letting go of that fear of being judged. And eventually, I think it was my first session. My counselor asked me, she was like, so like, did you grow up in a Christian household? And I was like, yes, I did. Like, I went to church all the time. I was involved in my youth group and all this stuff. And she was like, have you found a church here? And I was like, no. I don't think anyone will go with me. I have 0 friends. Like, are you serious? And she was like, I think you need to find a church for you. Like, I think you need to go ahead and just push yourself. And the great thing about my counselor is she always pushed me out of my comfort zone, because I had isolated so much that my comfort zone was like this big, because I was isolated, I was afraid, and there was just not much, like, what I found comfort in was my room, nothing else. So eventually I got on my laptop, I think that night, and I looked up churches around me, and I found Timber Ridge, and I found their social media and everything, and I like scrolled through some of the posts, and I was like, this looks like a family-friendly church. Like, I think I can do it. So a couple Sundays later, my mom was like, go, like, quit talking yourself out of it, like, just go. And so I get ready for church that morning, and I go and I sit in the parking lot, and I went to the later service because I'm a college kid and, I don't really wake up early. But I went and I saw these families pouring out, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, is anyone walking in? Like, does no one come to the late service? I was like, oh my goodness. And then I saw people going in, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to go. And as soon as I walked in, like, y'all was greeting and just everything that, like, was so warming. And I was like, wow. I was blown away by already just being accepted walking through the doors. And I was like, okay, I can do this. Like, this isn't a big deal. I sat at the very back and by myself, and Pastor Joe preached that day. And I don't remember much of the sermon, but I remember I cried. I remember I was in the back row crying because it spoke to me. It truly, truly did. And it was God. It was God speaking to me, needing me to hear him finally, because I was so isolated that all I was listening to was the enemy's thoughts, and everything about that. Like, I completely lost my relationship with Christ. And so being in that church, in that sermon, in that moment, he was able to finally reach me. And I think that was definitely like my finding Jesus moment right there, was finally being able to pull myself out of that isolation, because it's just the worst place to be, honestly. Yes.
Yeah. It's really hard. And I think there's so much power in that and in your testimony with that, because I think that is where so many people find themselves in college. And there's people in our life groups right now. And I mean, one of the girls, I reached out to her last night because I was like, I know that she's been struggling with being alone and feeling like she has no friends. And I literally reached out to her and was like, I feel the same way. Like, I hope like, you are not alone. And it's been one of the hardest things for me in the season that I'm in, because all my friends moved away and all this stuff. And I remember, and I say this all the time, but I remember going into this semester with life group, and I was like, it's just so adamant. I did not want to do it. And I was like, you know what? I've been here for long enough. I'm just going to tell them I'm not doing it. And I tried that and it didn't work. And then the first few weeks, Emma Bailey was the only one that showed up. And so me and Emma would go to McDonald's every single night. And then I got a DM from JC, and she was like, hey, I was in your life group a few years ago, and I just want to know if I can join. And I think I have some friends that want to come with me too. And I was like, yes, like, come, please. But in this time, I have found myself literally surrounded by the most people that I have ever been, because of just stepping into that obedience of God. And I think that's what I encourage the girl that's in our life group about all the time, is that, when you're in that season, it's so easy. And especially with what you're talking about with COVID, I think that so many college students found themselves in that place because literally there was no one. And I stayed in the dorms because 2019 to 2020 was my first year here. And when they shut down like it was spring break, because we got an extended spring break, and then it just never came back. No. And me and a couple of my friends stayed on campus, but we were the only ones. And I remember like D-Hall, like they packaged up your food and you could just go in and you had to grab your food and go. Like there was no community at all. No. And that was some of the hardest times for, like you shared yourself, but not only you, like so many people. But I think that just goes to show like the fact of like JC's testimony, and there's so much more to it that we'll get into, but even just that little moment of that's something that so many people can share with you. And so that is so important. And that's why I love JC. And I say all the time, I was telling our life group last night, like everybody needs JC in their life, because JC's just the perfect friend. Like I know humans aren't perfect, but JC's just the perfect friend. You're gonna make me cry. You can tell like she's just so intentional with her friendships. And we were talking about last night, like how do you how do you call out the sins of your friends in a humble way? And everybody's like, I don't know how to do that, I don't know. And JC's like, well, you actually just have to approach them in a really kind way. And I'm like, only JC only JC can do this. But I think only through what you've gone through and what God walked you through with loneliness and understanding that time where you had no friends, now you've grown to be one of the best friends to a lot of people. And so I think that's so cool. So cool.
thing.
I love that. Okay, so that was a little part of your testimony, but I know that there's a lot more to kind of what's brought you here today. So
Absolutely.
do you want to kind of dive into that, share a little bit more of like from 2020 to now where your walk has gone?
Yeah. So I think a huge part, or a huge person who played a role in my life, I met a year later, and she had a boyfriend at the time, and we met in welding class, and we had classes together like online, but have never met. And finally classes are back in person, and we were in this class, and we're in this welding class, and we were like, hey, we need to study, because this was one of the hardest classes I've ever taken in my life. Like welding, like never really done it, but I was like, I took one class in high school and that was it. But she was like, I took a lot more welding in high school. She was like, so I think I can help. And we were like, okay. And we were also with this one other girl. It was the three of us. I was like, our teacher calls us Three Musketeers. That's the name of our group chat to this day. I was like, gotta love them. But her specifically, she ended up going through a breakup during our friendship. And I started seeing her start to spiral the exact same way I did, with the isolation, with the thoughts, with the enemy attacking her, depleting her self-worth, depleting who she is, and her walk with God started dwindling, because a lot of times when we go through breakups, we go through those times where, because we do tend to find our worth in other people, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. Like, we lean on each other, we find support with each other, but you have to draw that line to where it's not your self-worth and your happiness that you give to that person. Like, yes, they can like boost it, but that has to be found in you, and it has to be found with God. But I started to see her spiral in the exact same way, and God spoke over me, and he was like, I'm going to use you. Like, this is your calling. This is her season, and she needs you right now. And the only way she's going to hear me is through you. So like, God used Pastor Joe for me. I was able to reach through to her, and I was with her every step of the way. I took her to her first counseling session, sat in the car and waited, because it's nerve-wracking. It is. And just being able to pour into someone else fulfilled me and fulfilled my call. And from then on, I immediately knew that I was meant to pour into my friends. And I try my very hardest to love them like God would love them, because I just want to be able to provide that in case they've never experienced it before. And you truly just never know what someone's going through, because even your closest friends sometimes like don't tell you things that they're like struggling with mentally, or what's going on in their family life. And so I think it's just really, really important to just ask God, be like, how can you use me in their life? Because he is so intentional with how he uses us and where he places us. So we need to be intentional with our actions and our words, and just be like, God, let my heart be filled with your words, and let what I show like reflect you. And that is, to me, like, that turning point was her story and part of her story, and like boosted mine. And I finally found like a purpose and a calling, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being the friend that pours into others. And yes, like, friendships should be pretty mutual, and there is a lot of times where they're pouring into me as well, but I'm okay if they don't. And that's okay, because God pours into us all the time, daily, and there are days we don't pour into him.
That
because
was so good. That was so good.
We don't. And it's just you just have to accept that we're going to fall short. No one is perfect. But if God is trying with us, then we need to try with others. And that's just kind of how I've lived since like that point on, and try to live out my testimony with others is just by doing a lot of outreach, doing a lot of pouring. And there are days the enemy tries and gets the best of me, and he's like, why are you spending so much time like with like pouring into people that aren't pouring into you? And I'm like, but they are. I was like, they are. And even if they aren't on some days, it's okay. Like, I don't need that. So
that's so good. So, the thought just left my brain. I had a thought. It left. I don't know. Okay, so
okay.
I want you to dive a little bit. Okay, this is what I was going to talk about. So I love that you mentioned, like, God speaking to you and telling you, like, you will be that friend to others. And I think, and I just want to speak out this because I think that a lot of people, and I've dealt with it so much because I'm like, you know, I do feel a calling to ministry and to preaching and all of that stuff, but I know that that's not everybody's calling. And so I struggle sometimes when people are like, well, you know, like, what is my calling? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's hard. Like, when you walk through, everybody's calling is different. And some people, everybody is called to ministry, in the fact, or in the being of, in some point that may not be like church ministry full time, but you are called to ministry and to serving God's kingdom at all times. And so JC does a lot of things like agriculture and stuff, but through her calling with Jesus, she has also been able to be a good friend.
Yes.
And so I think that's so cool that you came to that realization so young. I mean, we're not young, but we are young.
We're young, but like not
like
young.
The old young. But I want you to talk a little bit more about, obviously you talked about your one friendship, how God has seen you through in other aspects. Because I know, like, with Brooke and Kaylee, who's her sister, and Keller and all of them, like, you and that's the only glimpse that I see. But how has God worked with you in, like, those friendships and other friendships since coming to that realization of your calling?
Yeah, so I'll start with my sister. She is one of my roommates, and she followed me over here. No, but she loved Tarleton, and we decided to just go ahead and live together. We've done it our entire lives.
Yeah.
Why not? Sounded like a great idea, but it is. And right now, she's going through a season of something she's never experienced before, because she is talking to this guy. I was like, talking to this guy, and is truly finding so much happiness, and she's finding herself and growing and maturing through this, and I'm getting to watch her and support her through all of this. But then there are those days where the enemy attacks her, and she gets those doubts, like, does she deserve this, or anything of that matter, like, is she good enough for it, like, and stuff like that. And so I get to minister to her and talk her out of those thoughts and help her escape those places of that. Same thing with Keller. I think me and her were put together for a very specific, like, such a good reason. We've helped each other a lot through our walk with God. We went to Passion together, which was such a cool experience. But I was like, Keller and I both have had those times of, like, darkness, and through what I've gone through, I was like, because I would not be able to do anything that I do. I would not be able to pour into if I was not, if I didn't go through my time of isolation. One of the things from Passion, they were like, Jesus' scars were used for good. Why can't yours be? And I'm like, that's,
period.
yes.
That's good.
I was like, I love that. It has hit me that day on. And I was like, you're so right. Like, these are my scars. I wear them proudly, and I'm using them for good, and I'm using them to pour into my friendships. Brooke, on the other hand, I invited her to church with us a while ago. She's one of my first invites, and she came, really loved it, and I've pretty much just dragged her to life group with us, and I've loved getting to watch her, because she's gone through some up and downs with some friendships and stress and anxiety in school, and I've loved watching her lean on God, and watching her grow in her faith and start to pray. And there was one night in church specifically, I remember she was crying during a worship song, and Brooke never cries, not at least not in public. And so I went over to her. I had no idea what was going on. And I was like, hey, can I pray for you? And she nodded her head. And I just prayed over her while this worship song was going on. And I hugged her and sang the rest of the song with her. And she texted me later that night. She's like, I've never had anyone pray over me.
Oh, I'm crying.
Yeah.
I love you guys. And that's what she brings up, Brooke, which I know most people watching this aren't going to know Brooke.
I know.
I love Brooke. She's so funny.
Yes.
But I laugh all the time because when JC's right, she did kind of like drag Brooke, and you could tell when she first came, and Brooke would sit in the corner and be like, you know, and I'd ask questions and she would be like, and everybody else would talk and Brooke was just in the corner, and it was fine. But I think it's been so cool to watch her open up, and we joke now, we'll be like, she'll talk and we'll be like, oh, your checklist is done, Brooke, no more
she
talking.
spoke for the week.
But truthfully, it's so cool. And I think even last night seeing that, where I'm like, people are finding their voices in Christ, and it's through people like you, and it's through people who are obedient in what God's called them to be, and obedient. And some people do not find friendship easy, and some people are not going to be like JC, truthfully. And like, I love my friends, but I love my friends, and like, it's hard for me to sometimes, and like, with being like on the stage a lot at church and stuff, I'll see people all the time who'll be like, hey Lauren, and I'm like, I don't know you, but then I feel bad because I'm like, I don't know you. And so that's not something that like comes firsthand to me or comes supernatural and super easy, but for people like JC it is. And I think it's so beautiful to see that even in times of both, God is still working. Yes. And so I think it's been so cool to see you and little Brookie. But anything else you want to share? Any other kind of moments that you've seen God working in that calling?
I do. Yeah, actually. I shared this in Life Group a while ago, but I do think it plays like, it's more on the brighter side of my testimony. So I did competitive dance all the way from like 3 years old till I graduated high school. And my dance team, the parents there, my nickname throughout that time was like, you're such a light, you're such an angel. Like all the time, even Sunshine. I got Sunshine a couple times. Like that's just the way they like complimented me. And then when I didn't have my relationship with God, I was like very confused on why they were comparing me to that. I was like, I don't understand. Like, what is this light you're talking about that I supposedly carry? Like, what? But as I got older and as I have been like digging deeper, reflecting, because a lot of like getting in the word is also reflecting on your past and be like, you know what? Jesus was there with me. Yeah. Because that light that they were talking about was definitely Jesus. And it was definitely him. And so during that time of isolation and stuff, I obviously had to leave dance behind. I was no longer a part of a studio, and that was my escape. That was my happy place. So that was a hard thing to say goodbye to. But this other friend that I met in welding class, I was like, not the one I talked about, but this other one, she, without knowing any of my past, one day she called me and she was like, you were such a light in my life. And I immediately was like, that's crazy, because this isn't the first time I've heard it, but it's the first time I've heard it in college. And Brooke also calls me like her angel on earth. And I was like, and this is not bragging on me whatsoever, because what I carry in me is God and God only. And what is shown to other people is God and God only. And the only reason I have these nicknames are because of him and for him. And so the friend that I was talking about is the one who got to baptize me. And my decision to get rebaptized came on a Sunday, driving home from Pleasanton to Stephenville, and God just hit me with it. He was like, I think it's time, I think it's ready, because that first sermon that I broke down with Joe preaching was also a baptism, and I witnessed that, and I was like, before I leave this place, I want to be rebaptized. I made that decision then and there. I was baptized at a super young age, like 2009 young, but so I wanted to do that again, and I wanted to do it when the time was right, when I felt like my relationship with Christ was right and finally on the right track. And so one of the things that came to me during that time was that he was like, I'm going to, like, your baptism is for you, but I'm going to use you. Mm-hmm. And I was like, please do. And he was like, ask this girl to baptize you, because she's been contemplating baptism for a while now. And he's like, I'm ready for her. Like, I'm ready for her. I'm accepting her with open arms. When she is ready to baptize, I'm ready to call her mine. And she's been walking in her faith, and we've been going back and forth, exchanging podcasts. We back in the olden days, back before we started our walk with Christ together, we bonded over our like rap music. And now we're sending Christian rap music to each other, and we're like, guys, so it's just been really, really good. But I think, like, even though that baptism was for me, and that was me rededicating my life, I'm so glad he allowed me to choose someone, to allow him to work through me for her and show her, like, he's ready to accept you as well. So
that's so good. Thanks for sharing.
Of course.
Do you have anything else you want to add before we kind of close out?
I think that's all.
Okay, well, the closing question: what is one piece of life advice, quick and simple, that you wish you could have given your younger self?
I definitely would have to say, just based off of my testimony, don't isolate yourself. Don't isolate yourself to where your comfort zone is only your bedroom. Yeah. Because the only place there, or the only person there that you'll find is the enemy, because he loves when you're by yourself, and he will constantly attack you. So try your very hardest to stay out and find a community, find people. And if you are going to isolate yourself with Jesus. Yeah. Be in the Word, be with some worship music, some praise, like anything like that. Anything to block out what the devil is trying to tell you.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing.
Of course.
I'm so excited. We hope that today and this podcast helped at least one person watching. The heart, again, just behind this is understanding that your testimony can be used, whether you see it as big or small or anywhere in between. God uses everyone, just like God is using JC and has used her and is still using her. So we hope that this helped you in some sort of way. I cannot wait to continue this little series. So we'll see you guys next week. Bye.